Good evening and welcome to the Wilton League of Women Voters 2018 Connecticut State Legislative Candidate Forum. I'm Karen Silverberg, Chair of Voter Services for the League. First, I'd like to say thank you to my committee members, Pam Clem and Florence Johnson, and our co-sponsors, the Norwalk League of Women Voters, the Wilton Library Association, Good Morning Wilton, and our partners, Wilton High School Model Congress. And our partners are right now collecting questions to the left side if anyone has any questions to hand in. We really couldn't have done this without the support of our partners and our sponsors. I'd also like to say thank you to the technical support given to us by Middlebrook Maven, who is comprised of middle schoolers who come and have a club and participate in audiovisual activities with their advisor, Michael Gordon. And of course, I'd like to say thank you to our own town league volunteers. And I'd like to give a big thank you and hearty welcome to our 6 candidates this evening. They're going to be making their own introductions and opening statements in a few minutes in order to save time. The League of Women Voters is proud to be able to serve our electorate. We're a nonpartisan political organization that encourages informed and active participation in government. We really appreciate you being here. We neither oppose nor support any political party or candidate. We welcome anyone over the age of 16 to become a member, so please find us on Facebook and at our Wilton LWV webpage. In addition to the questions that we received online, we have also handed out note cards as you came in the door. Please have your additional questions for candidates passed to the left by 7:15 this evening. We will not be able to get to all questions this evening, but we will take questions not answered tonight, and we'll try to forward them to all the candidates. 2 reminders before we start this evening. Please make sure you're registered to vote and that your address is correct. Information can be found at the back of the hall in the tables if you're not sure how to go about doing that. And then number 2, please join us in our surrounding leagues this Sunday, October 21st at 4 p.m. at the Wilton High School Clune Center as Wilton hosts the 4th District Congressional Debate. Harry Aurora and Jim Himes will square off in what aims to be a very engaging 90 minutes. Now, please join me in welcoming Jean Rabineau, our moderator for the evening. She's a director of outreach of the Connecticut League of Women Voters and a member of the steering committee of the Bridgeport Area League and a practicing attorney in Trumbull, Connecticut. Jean has been a moderator of forums for over 14 years and has been an invaluable research in putting together this forum. Jean, thank you, and I'll let you take it from here.
Thank you. First, I would like to thank the audience. We are going to request that round of applause that you just gave Karen is the last thing we hear from you until after the last closing statement. All right, you know the rules, guys. Secondly, the timers are set up by district. Will the timers for the 26th State Senate District please hold up their hands just momentarily? All right. For the 125th State House District and timers for the 143rd. All right. The candidates will get warning signs as well as stop signs. If the candidate is in the middle of a word when the stop sign is held up, I will let the candidate complete the word. I will not let the candidate complete the entire thought. I've learned. There will be a fairly strict timed format for tonight's proceedings. Each candidate will get a 1-minute opening statement. Each candidate will be given a 1.5 minutes to answer each question, and each candidate will get a 1-minute closing statement. However, because there are 6 candidates on stage, they will not be able to rebut every question. Each candidate will get 2 rebuttals per night. And they can use that to either rebut something that somebody has said or to extend their own remarks if they feel the remark needs extension. I will remind the timers that we do not ask for rebuttal or extension until after all 6 candidates have done their 1.5 minutes, and then the rebuttals are 1 minute. That being said, we're not even drawing for order. We're just going to take them in the order in which they're seated. Opening statements start with the 26th State Senate District, Ms. Boucher.
Starting?
We're starting.
Thank you, League of Women Voters, for tonight's debate and for all of you for being here. Many of you know me for my years of service in this community, but you may not know why I'm so passionate about it. I'm compelled to serve our state and you because of everything it has given me. My parents brought us to Connecticut when I was 5 years old. We had nothing, no education, no money. We didn't speak one word of English. Yet my father reminded us every day, education is everything. We took that to heart, and with the community's help and hard work, I was able to get the education my father dreamed of. As a result, I've enjoyed a successful career in business and in finance. My husband and I are fortunate to have been able to raise our 3 children here. But I'm deeply concerned right now that the state we love, which was the envy of the country, is in serious financial trouble. People and companies can no longer afford to live here, and I see it every day. You see it. Now more than ever, you need a senator with the knowledge, experience, and passion to get things done to help turn our state around. I believe I am that person who can best fight for you.
Okay, Mr. Haskell.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight, and thank you to the League of Women Voters for hosting. I think it's such a testament to the importance of this election that this room is almost filled with people. That's so exciting. For those of you who I haven't had the chance to meet yet, my name is Will Haskell. I'm running for the Connecticut State Senate to represent Wilton as well as 6 other towns. To be honest with you, I woke up the morning after Donald Trump's election, perhaps like a lot of you, and felt like I had to get involved in the fight against that agenda. And I know that that fight starts at the state and local level. So I came home and I started knocking on doors. I've knocked on almost 4,000 now, and I've met commuters whose trip to Manhattan has gotten slower over the last 4 decades. I've met a lot of parents who had to choose, and that's because we haven't invested in transportation in Connecticut. I've talked to too many parents who have to choose between advancing in their career and starting a family because we still haven't passed paid family leave in this state. And I've talked to so many young people who can't focus in the classroom because we haven't done enough to prevent the next school shooting. Despite all this, I'm optimistic about Connecticut's future, and I think you should be too.
That's time, and thank you. Next, Mr. O'Day.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Tom O'Day. I've been your state representative for the last 6 years, 125th District, which is most of New Canaan and part of Wilton. It has been a combination of the most rewarding job I've ever had, the least paying job I've ever had, and the most difficult job I've ever had. I pinch myself going up to Hartford, not only to keep myself awake, going up and back all the time, but also because I am truly honored and humbled to represent you for the last 6 years. I don't like using the term Democrat or Republican. I think in many other states I might be viewed as a rhino, and in many states I'd be viewed as too conservative from a fiscal standpoint. I consider myself a Connecticut resident who is focused on making the state better for everyone. I don't consider myself a Republican or Democrat when I go to Hartford. I consider myself a father, a lawyer, and a politician, and I look forward to explaining my views going forward. Thank you.
Sorry, that's time. All right, Mr. Tartell.
Thank you for being here. Thank you to the League of Women Voters. Thank you to the Model Congress. This is an exciting night for me because this is the first time I've ever done this in my life. So I'm really happy to be here. But I'm going to Hartford because if you look at what Hartford is doing and how it works, it doesn't work very well. And I've spent my life helping people figure out how to find common ground, how to work together, how to create a future. I did it at Pfizer, I've done it at GE, I have an executive coaching firm, and I've been teaching this type of thing at the graduate level at Columbia for 22 years. So what I want to do tonight is talk to you about what it takes to make the hard decisions, the strategic interventions to move this state forward and find the promise that it has, and to help you understand what differentiates me from Tom, because that will help you make your decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Lavielle.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. Thank you to both leagues and to the Model Congress and to Good Morning Wilton. My name is Gail Lavielle. I'm the state representative of the 143rd District, which includes most of Wilton and parts of Norwalk and Westport. I was first elected in 2010. In the legislature, I have both a caucus leadership position, assistant leader, and a committee leadership position, ranking member of education. I also serve on finance, revenue and bonding, and transportation. Before serving in the legislature, I served on the Wilton Board of Finance and Energy Commission, and I worked for 26 years in international companies and large service firms where I held senior management positions and managed people, made payroll, complied with business regulations in several countries, and learned to work constructively with others. My job is and has always been to represent you, not a party, not a personal agenda, not an ideology, you. And my priority is to make sure that all of you, if you want, and your families can have a long and productive future here in our beautiful state of Connecticut. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas.
So it seems like every day I hear something about how horrible Connecticut is, and that's part of the reason I'm running, because that belies the feeling that I have, that this is the best place I've ever lived. We have serious challenges, but I think of places like Flint, like Detroit, like Louisiana after Katrina, and those places were in a state of emergency, but I don't think that's us. I think we're in a state of urgency, and we need to hunker down and really get serious, put these politics aside and get things done. I stand for public transparency. I stand for fewer political sound bites, and I stand for more management in action. So I'm hoping we can all come together moving forward and take the state forward to create new headlines that match the feeling that I have in my heart. And thank you to everyone for hosting us. Thank you all for coming out and getting involved.
Thank you. All right. The first question will go to Mr. Haskell first. What are your thoughts on phasing out the income tax and/or tax on personal property? Please expand on how the budget would be balanced if they are phased out.
Thank you for this question. We hear this a lot from the other side, that they're going to eliminate the income tax, and it's an easy way to win votes because people don't like paying their income tax, generally speaking. But that tax accounts for 56% of our state revenue. Eliminating the income tax would blow an $11 billion hole into an $18 billion budget. Kansas already went down this path. He has the same economic advisor as Bob Stefanowski, the Republican running for governor. And when they did this, they couldn't keep schools open for 5 days a week. They couldn't keep their teachers above the poverty line. I don't know about you, but my family moved to this community because of our excellent schools. I think that's part of what makes Connecticut such a great place to live. I think eliminating the income tax would absolutely be a mistake. There are areas to reform our tax structure. For instance, I'm open to a reduction in the estate tax, but I think the best way to build our economy for the next 20 years is not to revert to an economic policy from the last 20 years. It's to instead invest in the next generation of workers, the next generation of small businesses, the next generation of entrepreneurs. Rather than, we would lose so much money, $11 billion from eliminating the income tax. I'd rather spend some money investing in a student loan forgiveness program that gave students a break as they graduated from college and helped them to start their careers, their small businesses, their families here in Connecticut.
All right. Ms. Boucher.
Connecticut was the #1 state in the country for its low costs, its best education, the best quality of life. It did not have a state income tax, but yet it made its budgets, and it didn't have deficits. We can phase out the income tax and make ourselves competitive again, but in order to do that, it has to cut costs, and some of the ways to do that would be pension, wage, and health care reform. They are so expensive. In fact, this governor and the majority Democrats increased the costs even further through a union contract that was ratified last year on a straight party line vote. This contract was a 10-year contract. Our local police, fire, and teachers do not ever have a 10-year contract. In fact, if we just benchmark the state employee contracts with our local police, fire, and teachers, we could balance the budget. They not only had a 10-year contract, a 4-year no layoff, a 4-year no outsourcing, lump sum bonuses, and 2 rounds of pay increases that amount to $353 million by the year 2021. This is unaffordable. It's created deficits. It's put so many more taxes on the shoulders of the remaining people that are here. It is no secret that people and jobs are leaving. It's no secret that 80% of jobs lost at the Great Recession have been recovered, and yet our neighboring states, Massachusetts, has recovered 300%. By all measures, we're at the very bottom of economic rankings, and everywhere I go, people are concerned about their home values being lost.
Okay, I'm sorry, that's time. Same question to Mr. Tartell.
So, excuse me. So the state income tax needs to be maintained. It accounts for about 50% of the revenue for the state, and so you cannot make a tremendous cut in that because of the size of that tax. The fixed costs that we have to carry with the pensions that have been underfunded since 1939. So there's a reason why Weicker put in the income tax. He looked at what we were having in revenue. He looked at what the pensions needed to have in place to be fully funded, and he said, we don't have enough money. So if you remember, we had a sales tax that was over 8%. We went down after the income tax came in. We had property taxes that were higher. They were, because we only had sales tax and property tax, they dropped after the income tax went in. I'm not going to say that we can't do things to put things into different perspective and manage it a little bit better, but it's not around the income tax. I suggest that we make specific changes in terms of pension reform. We can negotiate with the union. The Janus decision with the Supreme Court gives us more opportunity to do that. And union members live in Connecticut. They know the issues we're facing, so that gives us additional ways to address that issue. We need to do that sort of thing.
All right, Mr. O'Day.
Yes, thank you. So this is why I'm running, okay, and this is why I ran. Since 1990, Connecticut has added the fewest jobs in the country, okay? Since Connecticut's gross state product is the only one with a negative growth in the last 10 years. We've had flat population since 1990. That's outrageous. And the reason why is because we've had one-party rule for 38 of the last 40 years. Not to pick on my Democratic friends down here, but you're much different than the Democrats up in Hartford. I'm telling you right now, we were not allowed to be in the discussions over the budget for essentially 38 of the last 40 years. The only reason we had a balanced, no tax increase budget the last 2 years ago was because we had enough numbers for them to invite us into the room and negotiate. We passed the first Republican budget that was vetoed. We got Democrats to come on board. The first bipartisan budget in almost 40 years. So what I'm saying to you is, if you think the state has been well run since 1990, you think your house is overvalued, and you think you're undertaxed, vote for my opponent. If you want more bipartisanship, if you want to increase jobs in the state of Connecticut, if you want another bipartisan budget, if you want bipartisan legislation, please elect me to go to Hartford. I'm a deputy leader, the only one to come from Wilton and New Canaan. I'm a deputy leader. I review all screening, all bills, along with Ms. Lavielle, and we literally have stopped hundreds of tax increases, and I ask you to let us do it some more. Thank you.
Thank you. That's time, I'm afraid. Ms. Thomas.
I actually don't think taxes are the issue. When I talk to people at the doors, almost everyone says they would not mind paying taxes if it went to where it's supposed to go. So that's a management issue that has nothing to do with Democrats or Republicans. But now we are in a mess. Stefanowski, I think his campaign said just yesterday that, oh, we can't actually cut the income tax, but we want people to know we're aspiring to do it. And even if we don't make it, if we do something, they'll be happier. And maybe that's true. So we definitely, given the budgetary shortfalls, we won't be able to do that. I don't think anyone answered the personal property tax side of the question, but I'm not sure what Mr. Lamont is proposing would work in full as well, but at least he has proposed some solutions of where that money would be offset. I know that a lot of things have not worked. I don't think the corporate welfare has worked. I'm in favor of just really a line-by-line audit, comprehensive tax policies, looking at what incentives are out there. Oh my gosh, time goes fast. What tax credits are out there, and really think about where we can solve this problem, because this political sound bites, it's just fiction, and we have to solve it for real.
Thank you. Ms. Lavielle.
Thank you, and I won't repeat a lot of what's been said, but we can't do anything like this overnight. You can't do any of this kind of thing overnight. The state hasn't been well managed. Ms. Thomas has mentioned management, and when you are managing an entity this large well, you have to look at reducing taxes while you look at reducing spending, while you are trying to engineer some economic growth. And you have to do it all at once, at the same time, but not in one fell swoop. It takes time. My preference is to start with the taxes that put the most pressure on retirees, because they are the ones who feel so much pressure, especially when they're on a fixed income, estate tax, gift tax, pension income tax, Social Security income tax. Start there. And then over time, if things are being managed well, if we are reducing spending and we are reducing taxes and we are growing the economy and bringing more jobs here and growing the tax base, then we can look at reducing the income tax over time as tax base growth and spending reductions permit. And we would try to get to a level where Connecticut is more attractive from that point of view than our neighboring states of Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, et cetera. That's what I think we ought to be aiming for.
Okay, at this point, I will ask if anybody on the panel wishes to rebut or extend. Yes, sir.
So this is the most important issue that you all need to be voting on, okay? At the end of the day, here's what I propose. I propose a 20% cut across the board in every department except for Judiciary and Department of Developmental Services, okay? Those two departments are already cut to the bone and we can't afford it. But that 20% cut will give us $2 billion, okay? With that money, about $650 million I'd use to cut, eliminate the tax on Social Security. We've already eliminated for some levels, eliminate across the board. Eliminate the tax on pensions. Okay, eliminate the gift tax. If you do those things, immediately Connecticut becomes the best place to die. Now, I'm not looking forward to making Connecticut the best place to die, but it's a first step, because then, once you go there, you start reducing taxes and you increase jobs, decrease regulation. When I was on the Reg Review Committee, we passed a new law that requires Reg Review to review all regulations instead of having it passed around. So we have more regulations now. Every year they grow. I'm telling you, please elect me come November. I promise you, better times are coming.
Sorry, time. Any other rebuttal or extension on the tax question? Yes,
Tartell?
Sir. All right, Mr. Tartell?
So you drop $2 billion out of the budget. 42% of the budget is for fixed cost. So think of what happens when you take basically a 20%, a 10 to 20% cut out of the available income, and think of what it means for your schools. Think of what it means for the infrastructure and the investments that need to be made there. So we've seen with corporations that guys who come in and cut and slash, those corporations rarely turn around and make the strategic decisions they need to have. You need to make strategic decisions, you need to make hard decisions, and there are taxes to eliminate. I agree with Tom on gift tax and estate tax, but that's 1% of the budget. That's not $2 billion. That's $200 million. And so there, you then make considered changes to make the investments we need to have to take us forward.
And that's time also. Yes. All right, Ms. Boucher.
Thank you very much. We should remind everyone that the income tax was a temporary tax. The real estate conveyance tax was a temporary tax. The increase in the gas tax was temporary. The business entity tax was temporary. And yet they become permanent, and our fringe costs during that same period of time, when we extended taxes, fringe costs have gone through the roof. 85% of a salary was is the current fringe cost when it used to be 40% of a salary. We're so out of line with the rest of our neighboring states, just in New England, not even the rest of the country. We have to do something about this to make the state more affordable, because everyone I visit when I go door to door, they mention taxes, home values dropping, and job loss is their number 1, 2, and 3 concern. So we must approach that, and we can do that if we reduce the very high fixed costs. We can do that by lowering those wage contracts, getting the health care plan that the state employees have in line, $2 for any prescription drug, $15 for any doctor they go to,
Time.
and finally, no copay.
Okay, sorry, but that's time. Anybody else willing to rebut on the tax question? I point. Mr. Haskell, do you want to rebut? Okay, all right. I am going to go to question 2. It is going to start with Mr. O'Day. Question 1 on the ballot covers the Special Transportation Fund, known as the lockbox. Please tell us your thought on this ballot question. Do you think that tolls are the answer to improve Connecticut's infrastructure?
So the lockbox was originally legislation that David Scribner got passed. He was the ranking member of transportation before I was. Then Gail, myself, and Tony got the constitutional lockbox theory through the House and the Senate. We wanted a real lockbox. The majority party literally said, we don't want a real lockbox, we want to be able to rate it. It's been rated to the tune of somewhere between $650 and $1.5 billion by the majority party. I hate to keep saying that, but at the end of the day, when you don't control the keys, and the other side does, you literally aren't invited into the room, and they have been emptying out the lockbox. So this is a good step. Yes to the lockbox. Tolls is a different issue. Connecticut is much different. What I would entertain is if you do a one-lane public-private partnership on 95 in each direction, so that it's not built with union money. So you have a private company come in, they build one lane going north and one lane going south, and you toll that. If they build it, they control what it costs to go on it. They have to make their money back. I'm in favor of that. What I don't want to see happen with tolls is we have a $20 billion a year budget. It needs to be 17, okay? The reason why we have a constitutional spending cap that the majority fought for since 1990 is because of the bipartisan budget that was the basis of the Republican budget. And if it weren't for that, if that constitutional spending cap was in place back in the 90s when it was supposed to be, we wouldn't be in this mess that we're in right now because of the majority party. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Tartell.
I believe in the lockbox. Excuse me. You know, there are times you do inappropriate things. I believe in the lockbox, and I believe in tolls. Tolls give us the money and the income stream to take care of our transportation, both the mass transit and the roads and bridges that we have to fix. It gives you an operational stream of income that is guaranteed and focused and comes from people from outside the state. We are one of only, there are 42 states that have tolls, we do not. Tolls then give you a way with Easy Pass to take that money. You can have 2 levels of fares. I go to Long Island to see my mother-in-law and my mother every weekend. No Easy Pass, you get highest fare. Easy Pass, New York, you get a different fare, and I'm from Connecticut, I get the middle fare. You can do that. You can also do congestion pricing, so that if you leave for work at 5:45 in the morning to go towards New York, you're at a cheaper fare than if you leave at 6:15. So that gives you a way to manage the flow of cars where you don't need to put in a new lane. And I will remind you about Super 7 and what that meant for Wilton. So we've got lots of ways with Easy Pass, with tolls, to have a focused stream of income and to make a difference in a way that you can manage the infrastructure, but you don't need to change it significantly.
Okay. Thank you. Ms. Lavielle.
Thank you. I've been a proponent of the lockbox, as Mr. O'Day said, for years, and I actually even introduced my own constitutional amendment resolution in 2015. So I wish the one that were on the ballot were stronger, but it has the merit of existing. Tolls, There's a couple of things I would say here. First, in response to Mr. Tartell, the only kind we can do is congestion pricing right now. But they can't be a short-term way of raising revenue simply because the DOT has told us it'll take several years to install them. For the near future, we've got revenue from a lot of sources: the gas tax, the gross receipts tax, a portion of the sales tax on new cars, as well as general obligation bond funding, all of which we use to not have rail fare hikes and service cuts last year. In the out years, we probably will see a big decline in gas tax revenues because there will be electric cars, there will be fuel-efficient cars, so on and so forth. At that point, we will need a new revenue source. So the smart thing for us to do now is scenario planning, is to develop a series of projections on market-driven gas tax revenue declines, estimating how much money will be needed each year, and then matching potential revenue sources, tolls, optional tolls, public-private partnerships, to see what the needs would be and evaluating them as a solution. And then in the event that they were to include tolls, it would only be in the context of the natural disappearance of the gas tax.
I'm afraid that's time. Ms. Thomas.
I am very much in favor of the lockbox, but I also agree that it's not strong enough. We also need to think about, as I understand it, and perhaps everyone who has been in Hartford for a very long time can clarify, but as I understand, there's no provision in the constitutional amendment that would indicate what income is then put into that lockbox. So Hartford still can control whether the gas tax money goes there or certain other income streams. As Ms. Lavielle alluded to, I think that's all fine for right now, but a lot of the places we are getting revenue are going to cease to exist as we lessen our dependence on foreign oil, move toward electric, have more fuel-efficient vehicles, as we have shift to a millennial reality where people want to ride share and live in walkable cities. A lot of these revenue streams are drying up, which is why this is a national problem. You may recall President Trump ran on this issue of infrastructure because the income is drying up everywhere, and he proposed national tolling. I believe in tolls. My time is almost up. Like Mr. Tartell said, I believe out-of-state trucks and residents, people at the poverty level, et cetera, have special exceptions.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Boucher.
3 individuals on this stage have been on the Transportation Committee and have all proposed lockboxes on state transportation funds. This became a real cause for many of us. And then it became a bipartisan idea when the governor wanted to institute tolls, and he found that a way maybe to persuade people is to convince them that they were going to not raid that fund anymore because it was constantly being raided. Well, I'll tell you, I had an interesting exchange with a constituent this weekend. She was a VA nurse, and she said, if you put in tolls, I have to cross that border every single day to help veterans. That would be devastating to me in my job. And that's individuals like that are telling me that that toll would be just another tax, taking money out of their disposable income, maybe $50 a week, $200 a month. Connecticut cannot afford tolls right now until it reduces some of the other costs. Let's talk about it if you reduce the gas tax. There's an 8% increase on your gas tax every single time you fill up. We have car property tax other states with tolls don't have. We have a myriad of other taxes that other states that don't have tolls. Let's talk about it if we restructure our tax policy. Right now, we've shown a way by prioritizing current bonding where we can increase investments in our infrastructure. What we really need to do is develop a short-term plan, a needs assessment for roads, rails, bridges, and ports, and a long-term strategic transportation plan that meets the needs of our business sector. And all of the stakeholders should be a part of that process. But right now, the last thing we need to do is increase the cost of our residents.
Okay, thank you. Was that time? Yes. Mr. Haskell.
Senator, respectfully, you're entitled to your own opinions, but not your own facts. And you mentioned how much it would cost to cross the border every day. We don't even know where tolls would go yet. Connecticut is the only state between Maine and North Carolina that doesn't ask out-of-state drivers or trucking companies to contribute to the upkeep of our roads as they pass through our state, as they have a huge wear and tear on our infrastructure. This doesn't make us uniquely advantaged as taxpayers. It makes us uniquely disadvantaged because we bear the sole brunt of funding our roads. We sit here wondering why the trains are slower than they were in 1950, wondering why we have 302 structurally deficient bridges, and yet we're leaving money on the table, millions of dollars every year. Connecticut drivers paid $6 million to Massachusetts last year in tolls, and yet Massachusetts drivers paid not a cent to Connecticut. I absolutely support a transportation lockbox. A leaky bucket, I wish the statute, it sounds like we all wish the statutory language was stronger, but a leaky bucket is better than no bucket at all. But we have to raise revenue and be honest about exactly how we're going to fund our infrastructure, not by bonding out, but instead by raising the necessary revenue, by tapping into the out-of-state drivers and trucking companies that have a hugely negative impact on our infrastructure. We're a geographic hotspot between Boston and New York. They can't avoid Connecticut. And I don't know about you, I'm sick of driving on 95, seeing too many out-of-state plates and trucks that aren't contributing.
All right. At this point, we will go to rebuttal or extension. Is there anybody who wishes to do so? All right. Why don't I start with Ms. Boucher?
In fact, I would beg to differ. In fact, there are wild estimates about how much tolls would bring in, anywhere from $400 million to even $1 billion, and no one really knows for sure. What we do know is that there could be 11 gantries from Bridgeport to Greenwich. There could be 12 of them in the same distance. In fact, it would increase the cost, and in fact, it has been shown that it could be at least $50 a week for people not going even across the border. This would really be damaging to the state at this point in time. There are other ways to do this. We've shown another pathway to do this, and in fact, our trucking industry pays $17 million a year just to cross the state without even stopping for filling up for gas. And by the way, their diesel tax is higher than any other state in the country.
All right. Any other rebuttal or extension? All right.
Ma'am?
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Will. Sorry.
Just going to say $17 million is, in the scheme of things, actually not that much in terms of our infrastructure needs. I understand, Senator, you've been recognized by the trucking industry as a distinguished legislator and that they're adamantly opposed to tolls, but ultimately they are having a hugely negative impact on our roads and bridges. And I would like to ask them for more, frankly, than $17 million. I think that most of the voters I talk to agree that it's time we actually invest in our trains. Look, we're the busiest commuter network in the country. The train, I keep saying this, I'll say it again, the train from Wilton to Manhattan has gotten slower since 1950, not faster. Too often what happens with tolls is opponents to any tolling proposal use scare tactics. They say that tolls are taxes. Tolls are user fees. If you take the train into New York every day, you have to pay for a ticket. I think the same should be asked of those who use our roads. They're not taxes, they're user fees. Let's acknowledge them as such and be honest about the fact that we don't know how much it would cost to travel to Stamford or into New York City because there isn't really a tolling proposal on the table yet.
All right. Is there any other rebuttal or extension? You've used your two. Sorry. Anybody? Yes, Ms. Lavielle?
Thank you. I always like to remind myself that this discussion of tolls that's been going on for many years, it's a legitimate discussion, is one of the few occasions where in my entire career, anywhere doing anything, where I've ever heard of sort of raising a question and saying, we got to get some money, let's get some money, without saying how much money we need, what is the goal, what is the concrete objective. Instead, it's sort of this amorphous concept of abstract tolls. We don't have an objective for how much they'll bring in. We don't have an idea of what they will cost to you. And we don't know the full effect of the advantages you would get. So I can't vote for something that will make you spend money when I don't even know how much it is. If I know that, I'll be a lot better equipped. And I think that these discussions need to be a lot more concrete before we can do anything.
Okay, it's time, I'm afraid. Anything else? Any other rebuttal or extension? All right. The next question is going to start with Mr. Tartell, and I bet it was written by a league member. As of January 2018, 34 states and the District of Columbia permit some form of no excuse needed early voting. 3 additional states conduct elections exclusively by mail. What would you do to enable maximum participation of eligible voters in Connecticut elections?
So this is, I think, given our state, given our nation, a fairly easy thing to do and something that's incredibly important. Connecticut has one of the tightest, most restrictive voting set of regulations in the nation. I went to help someone figure out how to do absentee ballot today, and the restrictions on an absentee ballot, you have to be ill, you have to be out of the country. There's all sorts of restrictions that prevent you from getting an absentee ballot. If you don't think you can get to work because you think your kid's going to be sick, you should be able to get an absentee ballot. It's still a valid vote. You have to prove who you are. There's no form of fraud that can happen because you need to prove it. So an absentee ballot should be much easier to do. In addition, we can vote on the day of voting. So many people, so many states allow voting that you can be early. So I'm going on a business trip. Let me get my vote done. Let me get that taken care of. Let me check that off the list. And so it should be easy to vote. It shouldn't be hard to vote. Yes, you should show who you are to vote. That's not the issue. It's how do we make it easy so people can stand up and fulfill their right to vote. And that's so important for us and for America.
Thank you. Mr. O'Day.
I agree. So I want to talk about transportation a little more so I don't have to do my rebuttal time. So literally, the public-private partnership issue is a huge one. So we had to prioritize our spending. What happened is we spent $700 million on a busway between New Britain and Hartford. $350 million of it state money and $350 million of it federal money. And literally, if you look, there's nobody on those trains. We got to prioritize what we spend our money on. That is ridiculous. One of the ideas I had, and both Gail and Tony were on the phone with me, I know it sounds a little crazy, but I got the commissioner to stay on the phone for an hour and a half, and we talked to the Boring Company. Now, what's the Boring Company? I know Elon Musk, he's got a lot of time now because he's not at Tesla anymore, but literally, they've got a proposal in Chicago to build a high-speed transportation system from downtown Chicago to O'Hare. I want to do the same thing at no cost to the taxpayer between New Haven and Manhattan. They're also planning it between DC and BWI. I know it sounds crazy, but Google the Boring Company. Things are happening technology-wise. Make it a public-private partnership. No cost to the taxpayer, and you'd bore under the ground, and you'd pay $15 to go to Manhattan in 12 minutes from Stanford. How great would that be? Imagine going from New Haven to Stanford in 10 minutes. What I'm telling you now is we need public-private partnerships. We had legislation that the unions made hide on companies, so we couldn't use them a few years back. Make them known, promote them, and let's do public-private partnerships, no cost to the taxpayers.
Okay, that's time, I'm afraid.
And vote.
All right. Ms. Thomas, the question is on early voting.
Hilarious. So we are asking our citizens to do the most important thing for our democracy in a 14-hour time frame. We have more time to buy a Mega Millions ticket, and hopefully you buy it tonight. But part of the reason I'm on this ballot is because my Republican opponent, among many other Republicans, have voted against just about every voting rights legislation that is, and I actually think that's somewhat criminal. I mean, not indictable, but it's crazy to me. It's unfathomable. People who work 2 jobs, I do a lot of phone banking for other candidates, and people have always expressed concern. Like they're caring for an ailing parent, they have a job, 2 jobs, 3 jobs, whatever it is, or they commute like I did for many years to Manhattan, and they can't make it to vote. We have to make sure more people are brought to the table between absentee ballot provisions, early voting. Denise Merrill testified when this vote came up that she could do it in a cost-effective way. Maybe we limit it to just the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday prior to Election Day.
I'm afraid that's time. Okay. Ms. Lavielle.
Thank you. Do I have to go to jail?
No, it's
okay,
not
you sure? Anyway, thank you. I know I have voted for at least 2 amendments calling for no excuse absentee ballots. There are some nuances here. There was a constitutional amendment resolution a few years ago that actually, while it was purported to allow all kinds of different situations where you could do early voting, what it actually did was strip all the language out of the Constitution so that which restricted things to just the way they are now. Just stripped it all out and then allowed the legislature subsequently to do whatever it wanted. So it kind of left a void in the Constitution, and that is what I remember we all voted against. I think that no excuse absentee ballots is a wonderful thing to have, and I would support that right this minute if we could do anything about it here today. I think that's all I'll say about that one. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Haskell.
This isn't an issue that I feel strongly about because I'm a capital D Democrat, because I'm a member of the Democratic Party. I feel strongly about this issue because I'm a lowercase d Democrat. I believe in a democracy, that we're better off when more people participate. And early voting is exactly the sort of policy that would encourage and incentivize people and help people get to the polls. Look, as our moderator said, we're one of just a handful of states that doesn't allow people to vote except for that one Tuesday in November. God forbid you're a single working parent or a commuter and you don't have time to make it to the polls that day. My opponent will tell you that we can't have early voting because people might change their minds, but we already have absentee voting. And, by the way, people change their minds, I think, because too often politicians send low and late mailers, which we've already shaken hands, neither of us will be doing. So why can't we have early voting in this state? The greatest crisis, I think, in our democracy is that 50% of people, roughly, in this community voted in the last midterm election. That's not nearly enough given the high stakes of who we sent to Hartford. And a central mission of my campaign over the last 6 months has been to work to get every single generation to the ballot, no matter what their political beliefs. I truly believe that we're better off when it is as easy as possible to vote and participate and play some role in shaping Connecticut's future.
All right, Ms. Boucher.
I believe that Representative Gail Lavielle highlighted why it's so important to look at the details of any bill, because oftentimes the details do not at all reflect what the title of the bill really is. I believe that the early voting question can be easily solved by no excuse absentee voting. And many of us, I in particular, am fully in support of having no excuse absentee. That really would solve the problem. The problem with having early voting is things happen at the very last minute that one can't even anticipate. It could be a week before an election. Case in point, I think if people knew before they were voting that it was a contract that was signed for state employees, the CBEC agreement that was signed and delivered by the majority party this year, that put the DOT and higher education in a terrible bind. Those commissioners that the president of higher ed told us directly to our face that the reason they're running out of money is their high fixed costs, their administrative costs. In fact, DOT is 9 times higher than the national average of their administrative costs, and it's eating up the funds that they would use for our rails and our roads. So we have to be careful about what we agree to and the contracts that are engaged in by the state, because it can tie the hands of future governors, future legislators, and in fact, most other states do not do collective bargaining for those benefits. They do it by the normal budgetary process, which reflects what's happening in the economy.
Okay, that's time. Thank you. Is there any rebuttal or extension on this one? Yes, okay. Ms. Thomas.
I just have to get back to voting. 37 states and DC early voting. I don't think that was addressed by any of my people in the other party. It's just, we have, as Will said, we have to make sure people are getting to the ballots. The way our society operates, we are disenfranchising more and more people to vote. The devil is in the details, I agree, but I did not see any details in the early voting proposal that would make anyone vote against it, other than just making sure people aren't able to express their American right to vote. That's it.
All right, any other rebuttal on this one? Okay, the next question goes to Ms. Lavielle first. It's a two-parter. What would you do to protect residents, especially youth, from gun violence, and should Connecticut's gun laws be made more or less restrictive?
Okay. Connecticut has among the strongest gun laws in the country, and I know because I voted for most of them. The ones I didn't vote for were passed before I got to the legislature. I voted for 1160 right after Newtown, where we got background checks in many levels. We got limitations on magazines. We banned some weapons. I voted for the temporary restraining order bill, which allows, which requires people who are subject to temporary restraining orders to surrender their weapons within 24 hours. And we also had the bump stock bill, which I voted for recently. There were things we have to do next year, like the ghost gun bill for various reasons, because those guns are not traceable. They can go through sometimes metal detectors without being detected. And they're really not safe for the people either using them or who might be in the same room with them because they're not inspected or anything like that. We have to do all these things. At the same time, we've got to do other things too. And we've got to keep working on a culture of violence that we have in this country that has somehow precipitated all of the incidents that we've seen recently. And that's a group effort. It's something that we will all have to do together and realize is happening and acknowledge it.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas?
Sounds like we're in agreement. I think Connecticut obviously is one of the states with the strongest gun laws in the country, but we can't stop there. There still are many loopholes. What bothers me is that there hasn't been enough money allocated in the federal government to study this as a public health issue. And what I see going to the doors, it is the one issue that every single person, young, old, Republican, Democrat, has expressed as a concern. It is weighing very heavily on us. So not only do we need to enact stronger gun legislation, I'm in favor, I don't think we need assault weapons for any reason, in addition to the ghost guns and all of the regulation about untraceable receivers and things that aren't have serial numbers. We have to solve that issue. I'm in favor of local mandated reporting from gun dealers to local law enforcement so that we can hopefully get ahead of some of these things. Biometric storage, all of these things that make things safe. But as Ms. Lavielle said, I also think even if we had the strongest gun laws in the world, that would not solve our gun violence problem. We have to think holistically about things like hate and intolerance and how we get that out of people. We have to think about, sorry.
Sorry, that's time. Ms. Boucher.
Some have implied that I believe that the gun laws may be too restrictive, and this is a clear distortion of the facts. In fact, the Western Gun Club in the last couple of years asked that they be allowed to keep ammunition on hand for people that come in to safely practice. They can't bring them in, they can't take ammunition out. It was by request, often a law by request. You put it in for them, then you have to push it through. When they asked, do I want to move this forward, I said no. The reality is that I was one of only 3 state senators to write the toughest in the country gun law, 1160. As a result, I was challenged in a primary by a Republican to take me out. The good news that year, I got the most votes of anyone in the entire state in the state Senate, and Connecticut Against Gun Violence supported me. In fact, this year, Moms Demand Action has given me a recognition of distinction for my work there. I worked on the restraining order bill. I also voted for the prohibition of bump stock, and I even put in a bill that passed to make it a higher penalty for anyone calling in gun threats to a school. There's only 3 of us in the Senate that led so strongly on this bill, and we're proud of it.
Mr. Haskell.
Senator, respectfully, when you say some have implied that you think we went too far in regulating guns after Sandy Hook, that was you. It was a forum just like this, and you were running for governor at the time. It was Republicans only in the audience, I believe. And you said, your words were, I think Connecticut went too far in regulating guns after Sandy Hook. My belief, and the belief of most of the voters I've talked to over the last 6 months, is that actually we haven't gone far enough. You shouldn't be able to order ghost guns in Connecticut. That's a gun over the mail that you buy in multiple parts without a check on your identity, without a serial number, and it arrives in your mailbox and you assemble it at home. You shouldn't be able to buy multiple weapons in one transaction, and Connecticut's one of just a few states that allows you to do this. If you're buying multiple handguns at once, the chance you're going to use those in a criminal manner goes up by 64%. There's a lot of common ground that we can build here, including with gun owners, many of whom I've talked to. At their doors, they agree that we should be doing more to fight gun violence, and it really has become a defining issue in this race. I'll just, you mentioned that when you go door to door, you hear a lot about property taxes. I do too, but I also ask at every single door, what's the most important issue for you? And I have to tell you, the most common response I hear is common sense gun regulation. I started this campaign in March, speaking to a crowd of 13,000 people in Hartford at the March for Our Lives, and they weren't just Democrats. They were Republicans and unaffiliated. They were young people who aren't old enough to vote yet, and their parents and their grandparents coming together because this is an issue of moral clarity and severe urgency in Connecticut. People don't feel safe, and it's our job to fix that.
Time. Thank you. Mr. O'Day.
Thank you. I just want to address, I'd say ditto with Gail and Tony on, I was part of that vote in voting for the strictest gun regulations in the country. I also voted for banning the ghost guns. As far as school security, one of the things that Wilton does right that New Canaan doesn't yet do right, and that's having the dog go through the high school unannounced for not only guns, because the dogs can be trained to smell out gunpowder and explosives, but they also are used to sniff out drugs. And I think the opioid epidemic we have going on here mandates that we have dogs going through the schools, not only looking for guns and explosives, but more importantly, even opioids and drugs. So the one thing I will say in response on Representative or Senator Boucher's behalf, there is not a person in this room that has done more for gun safety and children and education than Senator Boucher. And I'm sorry, Will, but if you keep saying and attacking her like that, I'm going to call you out because you're wrong. You graduated college last May, and Tony's been working very hard. Hold on.
Hey, cool it, audience. Audience, come on.
Tony Boucher has been working harder than anybody in this room, and I would argue in this state, for gun safety and the safety of our children and the welfare of our residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if I continue to hear outbursts from the audience, I will terminate this debate. Enough already, guys. All right, Mr. Tartell.
Thank you. Much of what I would say has been said, but there's a couple of things that I just want to add. On March 14th, when there was the March for Our Lives, I was here. I was interviewed by Channel 12, and I talked about how all voices need to be heard. And voices need to be heard, and they need to be heard in the right way, in a way that's civil, and that makes a lot of sense and is respectful for our society. The guns in our society are a threat to the way we live our lives, and they are a threat in so many different ways. 2/3 of those who commit suicide use a gun. Why do they use a gun? Because it's very effective. Most people who die because they're on the wrong end of a gun know the person who's pulling the trigger. Those are critical pieces of our society that we need to attend to. It's more than just making sure that guns are available or not available. We need to have the insurance so that people have full coverage for the mental health issues that they face that lead to things like suicide. We need to make sure that we tax guns. Pennsylvania spent $60 million on guns $162 million in Florida to make their schools safer. Tennessee just allocated $32 million. It's a lot of money, and those are ways that that we are taxed.
I'm afraid that's time. Does anybody wish to rebut or extend on this one? All right, thank you. The next question is going to start with Ms. Thomas. Timing being what it is, this may end up being the last question we ask before closing. And it is, how can we improve school funding across the state? Would you support or change the education cost-sharing formula that the state uses to distribute funds to municipalities for education?
I would change it. A lot of changes were already made with the most recent ECS formula, which make it a lot more fair. But one of the biggest challenges right now, I think, has to do with how poverty is being weighted and measured as the federal standards are changing. I'm trying to think how to describe this very quickly, but as the federal standard of poverty has basically dropped, is the simplest way of saying it, a lot of people are now being left out of the equation, whereas it is still very difficult, or it costs more to educate them. So I would want to look at how we can close that gap and figure out a new standard. I think the other thing that is going to keep coming down the horizon has to do with special education. The number of students being put in that class keeps growing, and it's the fastest growing population in the schools. And right now, the formula is taking that into account, but as that population grows, we won't be able to keep pace, so we'll have to fix that as well.
Ms. Lavielle.
Thank you. This is something that I've spent a lot of time on, and I anticipate spending more time on it. There are a lot of inequities in this formula, which has just become a patchwork over the years of various carve-outs for different towns. There is clearly a mismatch in many cases between the measure for household income in a town and the property values. Many times there is a big incongruity. Nowhere is that more apparent than in the city of Norwalk, which has a very high level of property values, but very low household income, a very high number of students on free and reduced lunch, in other words, a poverty measure, a very high measure of kids whose first language is not English, students that have more expensive needs. And we've got to look at this formula and adjust it for these factors. It has become extremely inequitable across the state in various cases. The formula has also not been fully funded in years, so the amount of money that's supposed to go to it isn't there, and a lot of districts are underfunded as a result. We need to put more money into education, which I hope we can do as we grow the economy. That should be a priority. And we should also look at some ways, I think, to organize special education a little bit more regionally for some services, because those costs are clearly growing way out of what we're going to be able to control.
Okay, thank you. That's time. Mr. Haskell.
So education is the best investment that we can make as a society, and I say that as a proud graduate of the Westport Public Schools. The problem is in Connecticut, we have some wonderful schools that are huge draws to communities like ours in Wilton and Westport and Weston, and yet so close by, other schools are falling behind. My parents are divorced, and I was registered to live at my mom's house in Westport, so I got to go to one of the best public high schools in the country where there was a smart board in every classroom. But had I been registered to live at my dad's house, I would have gone in Bridgeport, only 10 minutes away. I would have gone to one of the worst public high schools in the country, in a district that's been in deficit by $2 billion for the last 10 years. This is not only a moral failing in Connecticut, it's also a bad economic policy. There's too much wasted economic potential in our cities. We should be investing in students. That's why I have called for a comprehensive reform to the education cost-sharing formula that begins with the very basic question of how much it costs to educate a student. That's what Massachusetts did in the 90s, and as a result, they entirely revamped the way that they fund education. They rely less heavily than Connecticut now on property taxes, and it's really worked out in that state. I think that we should follow their example and make public education for all a promise so that your zip code does not determine your educational prospects or opportunities.
Okay, Ms. Boucher.
All parents want the best possible education for their children. It's the reason that I first ran for the Board of Education, later serving on the State Board of Education, and as ranking member and now co-chair of the Education Committee of the Legislature. I am intimately familiar with the education cost-sharing formula when it was devised in order to equalize education across Connecticut schools, particularly the inner city. And we had a lot of buy-in, even by affluent communities. What started off as a good formula turned into a very political formula with 45 various variables. Every year it changed. The one good outcome of an 18-18 tie in the Senate is it forced compromise, and it forced compromise on a new ECS formula that we put together, in fact, wrote, and I was a part of that, to, again, bring fairness and equity to all of our schools instead of just giving the funds to that particular district who happened to have a leader in a particular party on that committee. That's just downright wrong. And this governor proposed twice to send $400 million transfer costs that the state has borne since 1970 onto our towns and schools, which would devastate our school budgets and our property taxes. We stopped that, and we brought funds back to our underfunded schools and arrived at a new ECS formula. We have a lot more work to do on that. It's something I'd like to roll up my sleeves and continue, because education continues to drive my passion for public service.
Thank you. Mr. Tartell.
We were deciding who goes first. So with the ECS formula, we need to fund education. Connecticut has the second highest of income inequality in the nation. And the biggest way, the best way, the most effective way to close that gap is by giving people the knowledge, the tools, so they can succeed in life. And the best way to do that is through education. If you don't invest in education, then you got to invest in courts, because that's the only way they will get redress. So let's invest in education. I was involved in long-range planning teams in the Wilton School District for 22 years. And in 2000, we had 9 children on the autism spectrum. I think that's changed. We need to be able to fund special education on a much more regional basis, because school districts in and of themselves can no longer bear the burden. It's important to create a personal, close, specialized, flexible approach to creating a learning environment for each child, but the funding and the resources need to be spread across the larger region so we can do the allocation of those resources and funding to make that work. Finally, it's a leadership issue. If you look at how things get funded, I'm not a fan of Malloy, and he has really messed up the leadership of this state, and I'm very happy that he is not running again.
Okay. Mr. O'Day.
Another thing Ross and I agree with. No, honestly, I do want to say it is having the choice, and all of us up here running for election, we've all, I think, given you a good snapshot on who we are, and I'm very proud to be up here with all the candidates. And I certainly wasn't meaning to slight Will for running at his age. If he doesn't hold my age against me, I won't hold his age against him. But as far as the ECS formula, I'm holding it right here. I'm looking at it. Literally, the base amount is $11,525, okay? And this is and then they look at English language learner, poverty weight, poverty measure. What I'm saying is it's not necessarily a problem with the formula. We've literally, the Republicans put forth a formula. If it wasn't for Tony being the deciding vote in the Senate, the governor would have been able to sweep away all the money that Wilton got and all the money New Canaan got, which is about $1.5 million for each in the middle of the budget cycle. That would have impacted your taxes. I see I have 30 seconds. But so it's not necessarily the ECS formula that's the problem. What I see is a bloated administration, because under state law, you can't reduce funding to the Board of Ed unless you're in one of the top 10% school districts. And so what's happened over time is we've had a bloated bureaucracy that has gotten away from educating our children. We need to address that across the board and allow districts more flexibility in trimming the fat at the top. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Is there any rebuttal on this one? Yes, Ms. Lavielle?
Thank you. We've been talking about funding so much, and I would just like to add, because I spent so much time on the Education Committee, that a lot can be solved with money, but not everything. And in education, there are so many other factors that we have to take into account as well. Much of it is the excessive amount of administration and data collection and reporting that teachers have to do every day that is keeping them out of their classrooms. They don't get enough to spend enough time with students anymore. Also, we've piled an awful lot of duties onto our schools that go way past academics, that go way past even schooling, anything. All of this deserves a very close look and a very really intense scrutiny. There's still a lot of work we have to do, thank goodness. I think that since I've been on the Education Committee, it's become one of the most bipartisan or nonpartisan committees in the entire legislature, and I certainly hope we can keep it that way.
Okay, and that's time. Any other rebuttal or extension? Yes, Mr. Haskell, this would be your last one. Go ahead.
I'll just, I'm not rebutting anything that was said on stage. I just want to add that it isn't just about reforming the education cost-sharing formula. There are out-of-school factors that contribute to the low reading rates and poor math performance of low-income and English second language students. That's why we need an investment in early childhood education, because so much of the gap that we see in outcomes emerges before students even get into the classroom. It's also why we need paid family leave, because making sure that no parent has to choose between advancing in their career and starting a family, making sure that they have time to bond with their child before going off to work. 25% of American moms have to go back to work just 2 weeks after their child is born. That's a problem because so much brain development happens in the early phases of life. So we need desperately to pass paid family leave to close educational outcomes and reduce the gap between poor students and wealthy students.
Okay, anything further? Anybody? Mr. O'Day, I guess you do have a rebuttal available.
Just briefly on the discretionary spending, I've got a chart. So everybody should read the Connecticut Commission on Fiscal Stability and Economic Growth. It's a final report dated March of 2018. Honestly, just Google it. It's the most important report the state has put out potentially in the last 20 years. And what that report says is that discretionary spending has now been outpaced by our fixed costs for the first time in 2017. So literally, for us to turn the lights on, pay our debt, and pay for the employees, it's now taking up 53% of our budget, okay? So paid family medical leave is a wonderful concept, but guess how many private businesses will be able to afford that? They'll go out of business if they have to provide paid family leave. I work 2 jobs. My wife works 2 jobs, so I can work 2 jobs. I'm up here losing money from my profession as a lawyer, but my wife is taking up the slack and working 2 jobs. We need to create more jobs in the state, not less.
Okay, that's time also on that rebuttal. Anybody else rebutting or extending? All right, we're now in a time crunch. I can get in one more question before the closing if we limit the answers to 1 minute each. So that's what I'm going to ask the timers to do. The question will start back with Ms. Boucher. Do you support the state water plan as written? And do you have any comment on Aquarion's application to withdraw up to 1 million gallons of water per day from the Cannondale well?
Water quality, clean water, is something very near and dear to my heart. It is why I have the highest voting record in the state Senate in 2018. It's why the Connecticut Fund for the Environment has endorsed my race for this election. It is something that I actually was the deciding vote in the House of 150 votes when we were to shut down the sooty power plants in Connecticut. I have to tell you the reason for that is when we did come to this country from Italy, we were living on the shores of the Naugatuck River, the most polluted river in America, with chemicals pouring into it every day. I was born on a farm. We had clean water. We had water from a spring. It is critically important to me, and yes, I do support the Clean Water Plan, and I am particularly concerned about how plastics are polluting not only our waters, but the oceans in our country, and it is an issue for us to really seriously address in the coming years.
Thank you. Mr. Haskell.
I absolutely support the state's water plan. Water should be a public trust, and I find that very basic. I'll keep my answer pretty short here because I pledge that I'm always going to stand on the side of environmental regulations and protections, preserving our wonderful natural resources that make this state so great. Look, there was a study earlier this week or perhaps last week that said we're 12 years away from the point of no return in terms of addressing the climate crisis. This isn't about building a state that our children and grandchildren can live in. This is about building a state that's clean and actually available for us to live in. So this is, again, an urgent issue, and I absolutely support the state's water plan that would preserve our water as a public trust.
Mr. O'Day.
Yes, so I do support water as a public trust. In fact, I've got as my tab number 22 the actual final report of the state water plan. And I do agree with how to use the plan, the recommendations, collaborating with the Water Planning Council to formulate future legislation. I agree that it needs to be part of our public trust. I also agree that the good thing about the report is you'll see that most of the time our water is high quality, safe. The only times the plan most recommended is our conservation falls below the national average. So I think we needed to work on conservation, but otherwise I agree with the plan and I support it. And I look forward to more time next time.
Okay.
We're a politician. I can't help myself. I like the thought.
Mr. Tartell.
Thank you. I support like everybody else, at least to my right, I support.
I'm definitely to your right.
You are. So is Will, and so is Tony. At least in geography. So I support the plan. Water is a sacred public trust. When the water is bad, you have issues of illness and so on and so forth. I don't need to go into that. The environment we live in is at a crisis point. If you listen to what happens throughout the rest of the world, we have global warming, we have climate change, whatever terms you want to use, it's not good. And we need to do everything we can to change that. And our national leaders have lost that thought, and we need to start at the local level and work our way up. I need everybody with us on that.
Ms. Lavielle.
Thank you. This is getting old, but I viscerally support the state water plan. It's one of the reasons why I've been a 6-time environmental champion from the League of Conservation Voters. They endorse me every time I run. This is a very important subject to me. I used to be Senior Vice President for Corporate Affairs of Suez Environnement, which is a French company. It was the largest water company in the world, managed both drinking water and wastewater systems. I worked a lot in Africa. And I saw when a society didn't have water anymore, it simply had to cease to exist. And water supplies can be depleted. It is expensive to transport water. They can dry up, and they must be conserved. One remark on Aquarian. I'm concerned. I don't know how concerned I am yet, because I don't have all the information. I know the town is taking the necessary measures to consult on this, but I've been working with Aquarian actually down in Westport.
Time. Sorry.
And we do need to be concerned.
Okay. Ms. Thomas.
Ditto, 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 ditto. I support the plan, but I'll take this opportunity to talk about a different type of water while we're on the environment. We are seeing more extreme weather. I mean, in the last 2 weeks, we've seen storms, tornadoes, high winds. In Norwalk, many of you know, we had the issue of about, I think, 105 million gallons coming through with that latest storm for a system only meant to handle 90 gallons, which led to a lot of untreated water. You know, here in this district, we have the Saugatuck, we have the Norwalk, all leading into the Long Island Sound. This is something that we're going to have to start paying a lot more attention to and figure out how to work with all the towns and cities to beef up our plans. Extreme weather is not going away.
All right. I am not even going to ask for rebuttal on this one. We're going to go to closing statements. By the luck of the way it's working out, we will start with Mr. Haskell.
Sure. Thank you so much for being here. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you to Senator Boucher as well. I've really enjoyed this campaign, and I think it has been a robust exchange of ideas. I believe it's time to move Connecticut forward, and I don't think we can build the next 20 years of prosperity in this state by relitigating the last 20. I began this campaign nervous that I was too young to make a difference. But Tom, with all due respect, you don't need 22 years of legislative experience to know that students should feel safe in the classroom. You don't need 22 years of legislative experience to know that we can't continue kicking the can down the road instead of addressing our pension liabilities head on. I've knocked on about 4,000 doors. I've held 122 meet and greets as of this morning. Last week I earned the endorsement of President Obama, and I'm more confident than ever that we can bring a real change to this state on November 6th. It's time for all of us to take part in a government that belongs just as much to you and me as it does anybody else who sits on this stage tonight. Because only when we're all participating, when we bring the energy that we see in this room to the polls on November 6th, can we really turn Connecticut around.
Thank you. Ms. Boucher.
Every day, people tell me they're tired of the vitriol coming from Washington. The good news is Connecticut is not Washington. Colleagues in both parties know me as an independent-minded leader who works to represent you, not a political party. I've led on legislation to improve education, protect the environment, ensure equity and choice for women as well as the LGBTQ community. I've helped write the nation's strongest gun laws and most recently have led in the passage of 2 bipartisan budgets that did not raise your taxes. In Wilton, you know me, I get things done. Saving school funding, creating a greenway, stopping Super 7, widening 7 instead, saving our rail line, Orm's Diner, Ambler Farm, placing power lines underground, helping to finance Wilton Commons, our library, athletic fields, and teen center, even moving the Historical Society to its present location. Thank you for allowing me to be your voice. I hope I've made a positive impact on your lives because know you have made an incredible impact on mine. With your vote, I commit to fight hard for you and our future here. And you are never too young or too old to make a difference. You're not.
Thank you. Mr. Tartell. Mr. Tartell?
I was hearing O'Day. So I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. This has been a remarkable experience for me. I'm having the best time of my life, talking to people, learning things, and I want to say a special thank you to Jean for managing this whole process. I want to just talk for a minute about Tom and me, because our hearts are in the same place, our desire to help our communities are in the same place, but he joked about he's to my right, and he is. And so things like insurance, making sure that women have in their insurance plans the types of birth control that should be there, skinny plans that don't necessarily cover what you need to have covered, you get what you pay for. The pieces on sexual harassment training, we've both done sexual harassment training. I'm a learning and development leader. I've done it for a lot of years. I know how it's done. Together we can build a future. That's why I'm going to Hartford. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. O'Day.
Well, I want to say thank you to all of you. Thank you to the League. I very much enjoy representing you in Hartford. As a deputy leader, my reputation is crossing the aisle. I am very proud of my bipartisan nature. I will tell you some of the statistics that Connecticut leads in are being the last in job growth. We had 44,000 people and $5 billion leave the state between 2011 and 2014. We finally got a bipartisan budget 2 years ago and bipartisan fix last year. If you think Connecticut has been well run for the last 40 years, and you're, like I said before, and you think your house is overvalued and you're undertaxed, by all means, vote for the majority party in Hartford. If you want to give us a chance to turn the ship in the right direction, we got a constitutional spending cap passed, we got the bonding cap passed, we got a vote on collective bargaining agreements passed. We've gotten a lot done in the last 2 years, and I'm asking for 2 more years, please, because Connecticut can become the best place to live again. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Ms. Thomas.
My old boss used to say, I never buy when I'm being sold, so I took that to heart. I don't try to sell anybody. I'm a Democrat, but I'm also an independent thinker. I'm not afraid to stand up to anybody or say anything, really, even my own party. I like to help people even when I'm not helping myself. I like restoring order to chaos. That is the thing that gets me excited. I like to wake up every single day trying to figure out how I can do something better than I did it the day before, and that's just who I am. And these things have made me a valuable employee who's motivated not by incentives. It's made me an effective change agent in my work and a valuable member of the nonprofit sector community. And I want to go to Hartford to get things done, so we're not having this conversation 2 years from now, 4 years from now, 8 years from now, 22 years from now.
Thank you. Ms. Lavielle.
Thank you. It's an honor to be in my 8th year of representing you. And I come before you with extensive legislative experience, nonpartisan relationship, and respect built in Hartford, all on your behalf. I also come with a deep attachment to the 3 communities that I represent, including Wilton, where we've lived for 14 years. I also come before you with an appreciation of one of Connecticut's most cherished values, which is respect for the individual, regardless of economic circumstances, origin, background, or lifestyle. I've always sought to express that respect in my own conduct, and the legislature has supported this principle, and I've done it with them, voting for many bills that do the same. But restoring Connecticut's economy is also a matter of respect for the individual, and there the legislature has not delivered. I'm here because I am still determined to change that. Every one of my constituents deserves to be able to count on a future in Connecticut, and I come before you determined to do everything in my power to make sure they can. Once again, it's a matter of respect for each of you as individuals, from me to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the League, I want to thank the audience for the many wonderful questions you submitted, and I'm sorry we couldn't get to more. I expect that every single one of you is going to go out there and vote on November 6th. Do the country, the city, the state a favor. Get your friends who are registered to also vote. We need to improve turnout if democracy is going to survive in this area and in this state. On behalf of the League, my profound thanks to you, to the organizing leagues and organizations, and to all 6 candidates.
And who said politics was boring? Thank you all for coming. Drive safe, get home safe. Thank you so much.